On this video, I'm going to be doing a response to one of Steven Crowder's videos, and the video is called The Great Replacement Conspiracy Theory Came from the Left Louder with Crowder. We all know that Steven is probably the biggest conservative YouTuber, and I'm warning you, on this video he's going to have a lot of controversial opinions of immigrants that are not white. And he's not the only one pushing this thing. There was also Tucker Carlson, there was also the entirety of Fox News that was pushing the agenda of the Great Replacement Theory. And it's a theory that talks about how the white population is being replaced by minority groups. Basically, the majority of this country will become a minority. I'm not sure the situation of immigrants in European countries, but for now, this is coming from an American viewpoint of immigration. And by the way, this video came out right after the Buffalo shooting. The shooter by the name of Peyton Gander was inspired by the ideals of the Great Replacement Theory, and this was said in his manifesto. Also, it should be noted that Peyton was a mentally unstable individual. This was based by the way he isolated himself away from his family, away from his parents. And he was radicalized by the Great Replacement Conspiracy Theory. Now, of course, I'm not saying Steven or anyone pushing the Great Replacement Theory is responsible for the murders that happened in Buffalo, but their ideals did definitely play an inspiration to the shooter's ideals. Now, obviously, this wasn't the first domestic terrorist attack by a white nationalist. There was a shooting that happened in 2020 in August 3rd in El Paso, Texas. There was also the synagogue shooting that happened in Pittsburgh, although I would say that the shooter was an anti-Semite than a white nationalist. But yeah, the gist is there's been an uncomfortable amount of white nationalist terrorist attacks that's been happening in this country. But let's see Steven's viewpoint on all this. Like, what's his opinion on these attacks that's happening? Because he's making a pretty bold claim about the fact that leftists started the whole Great Replacement Conspiracy Theory.
Let's get to this, the Great Replacement Theory. This is the talk everywhere, and everyone is afraid. The left has been very effective in making people afraid to even address it. Now, let me be really clear here.
Well, at the time, there was a domestic terrorist attack that was committed by someone who was radicalized by the idea of the Great Replacement Theory, so it's not really surprising considering that this was a racially motivated attack.
I am not saying that the Great Replacement Theory is a theory that needs to be espoused.
This is the classic, I'm not racist, but, like, think about it, exactly the same type of energy. But who knows, maybe I could be wrong. Maybe Steven's actually going to give a good argument that's not racially motivated.
What I am saying is that there has been a misrepresentation, of course, of shooters, how they've been influenced, and who is out there, right, preaching this idea of the Great Replacement.
The United States to replace all the disobedient ones who didn't vote for us. The goal is as much immigration as quickly as possible, as fast as possible, to destroy the working class.
It's a full-scale invasion.
Any citizen of any nation should be upset and outraged when there's an invasion by foreigners into their country, people that have no respect for the rule of law.
Define it. Because according to the media and the activist echo chamber, white supremacists includes everybody from, of course, President Donald Trump. But then there's this guy who's been accused of it. And if you don't think that's enough, there's this guy who could forget if you're not, this guy. Yeah, he's one of them. And then finally, by the time you get to this actual white supremacist,
Steven, you had a video about what is white supremacy once. But again, as you saw, Fox News has spread the idea of whites being replaced by the minorities. But basically, white nationalists, white supremacists have been pushing this idea of the Great Replacement Theory. And how do I know that Fox News has been pushing the ideals of the Great Replacement Theory? Well, again, they are the ones that are calling immigrants invaders. And they tend to have a pretty disgusting ideal towards immigrants. So obviously, they've been some of the people that have been spreading the whole Great Replacement Theory. It wasn't the left.
They want you to believe that it is mainstream republicanism to tout a neo-Nazi slogan of Great Replacement Theory in order to silence you from discussing a very real issue of, I wouldn't even necessarily say race, I wouldn't even necessarily do the cop-out and just say culture, but voting demographics.
Yeah, I think you were about to say race and culture. But anyway, you realize that the Republican Party hasn't really had a more favorable outlook on immigrants. Like Donald Trump was the one going like, we need to stop all Muslim immigration until we can figure out what the hell is going on. Also building that wall to keep out the illegal immigrants. Like, I don't know about you, I think that's pretty reasonable to why the immigrants don't want to vote Republican. And if the Republican Party wants to keep floating because they're afraid of the demographic change that's going to happen, be more friendly to immigrants, have more pro-immigrant policies, then maybe you'll see immigrants be on your side.
And the purchasing therein. So in case you haven't heard, let's just go here so you see what I'm talking about. Everyone from the left has been, we have a montage, right? Them blaming Buffalo on the Great Replacement theory and racist conservatives.
I'm going to skip some parts of the video where they talk about how the media inspired the whole Great Replacement theory. Though the point is, yes, the shooter has written in his manifesto that he was radicalized by the Great Replacement theory. So obviously, according to his manifesto, he was radicalized by the Great Replacement theory, whether you like it or not. Like, according to his manifesto, he said, "Before I begin, I'll say that I was not born racist nor grew up racist. I simply became racist after I learned the truth." Then it talks about the communities he joined in 4chan. One of them was K, which I would assume is a gun community in 4chan. The other community is Out, which talks about, you know, how he loves the outdoors, and I'm not sure why there needs to be an online community on that, but whatever. The other is Paul, which basically talks about the 4chan political community, and there he learned that the white race was dying. He talked about the fact that blacks were disproportionately killing whites and collect $700,000 of taxpayers' money, basically talking about the welfare system. After which he talks about how the Jews and the elites were behind this, which again signals Great Replacement theory. And also, according to the shooter, he admitted to being a fascist, he admitted to being a white supremacist, and he admitted to being a racist. So yeah, I think that's enough evidence to prove why this shooter was radicalized by the Great Replacement theory.
Okay. So let me be clear about something. They're trying to use the term the Great Replacement theory. And the reason for that is that's basically an anti-Semitic sort of fringe theory that comes from people who believe that there's this cabal of Jews who are trying to replace white people. Okay.
Well, once again, the shooter did say he was anti-Semitic and that he did believe that the white race was dying due to the Jews.
Of course. I don't believe that.
So, Steven, you don't believe, despite what the shooter's manifesto said, that he was radicalized by the Great Replacement theory. It's almost like you're defending white supremacists. Could you make it even more obvious by now?
If you agree with the sentiment I'm about to express.
I'm not going to comment, I'm just going to make a response video, and I'll see what arguments you're going to bring forth. So let's see what evidence you're going to bring forth to see if the shooter wasn't radicalized by the Great Replacement or not. I know some people may say I'm cherry-picking evidence, but I'm just doing my best to summarize the shooter's manifesto.
I don't think that George Soros is sitting there, killing white babies. Okay. But what is happening is demographic changes due to large amounts of illegal immigration occurring unchecked and being made the beneficiaries of the social safety net, a current welfare system in this country, in order to ensure their votes.
So to summarize, and admittedly, it was at first a bit hard for me to understand it, that a large amount of illegal immigration into our country is going to switch the demographic of the political view. So to be clear, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but Steven, which party happens to be the party that demonizes immigrants? It's not the Democrats. In fact, they actually favor the immigrants. It is the Republicans. So yes, more immigration will lead to more people voting Democrats. But if they don't want that to happen, the Republicans should change their policies on immigration. They should stop demonizing immigrants.
Not saying there's a planned orchestration of genocide against white people, but there absolutely is a plan in place that is taking place right now before your very eyes in allowing mass illegal immigration into this country in order to try and change voting demographics.
Well, first of all, illegal immigrants can't vote because they're not citizens of the United States. Now, maybe you're saying children of those illegal immigrants will be citizens and therefore they will vote Democrat. Yeah, sure, we can agree on that, but this is all the Republicans' fault, not the fault of the Democrats. Once again, the Republicans have had a pretty negative outlook on immigrants, and regardless of which political party is in office, illegal immigrants are still going to find their way in.
However, that exact sentiment has been expressed for years by the left, and they do make it a race thing.
I think the Buffalo shooter would disagree with you on that because his attack was definitely motivated by race.
They call it the browning of America, and they brag about it.
Because it's true, due to the low birth rates of white people, things have changed. Racial groups have changed.
Demographics are destiny. So look, I think now it's fair. Hey, there's a huge difference between believing in the superiority of one's race versus acknowledging the changing of demographics. We have an overlay here. We have a reference. Let's go to overlay J. Really quickly. There you go. Those are the numbers. Those are the projections. Okay. And the left is...
Okay, other than the fact that they won't vote Republican, what else is your problem with this? I mean, the fact that the video was 21 minutes long, you must have had other gripes than the voting demographic. Because right now, I get the feeling you're going to go through the racial problems.
I'm going to get to the history a little bit of immigration, how this changed dramatically.
Yep, I knew it. I just knew it. Now, of course, he doesn't say anything about race. He's gonna say something else, trust me. And make it definitely sound like he's instigating race here.
Immigration up through the 1960s, certainly the 30s, 40s, not at all the same as today. Here's the primary difference. You cannot have open borders and you cannot have mass immigration when you have a social safety net and a welfare culture.
So wouldn't a higher population of the workforce mean that you'll be able to pay more taxes, which will make the social safety net better? But yes, US also had a history of mass immigration as well. According to a timeline in history.com talking about the history of immigrants, I recommend you guys check it out. Ellis Island opened in January 1892. And this was the first immigration station in the United States. Then, in 1907, 1.3 million immigrants entered the country through Ellis Island alone. And that was one of the peaks of immigrants back then in the United States. Also, according to migrationpolicy.org, between 1860 and 1920, the migration share of the population fluctuated between 13% and almost 15%, peaking at 14.8% in 1890, largely due to the high level of immigration from Europe. So what we learned from looking at these two sources is that America definitely had mass immigration by the drove back in the days as well. So much so that these immigrants happen to become a significant percentage in the United States population.
Huge difference between legal and illegal immigration. The left tries to act as though we throw it all together. Look,
you just showed a chart about how Hispanics are going to be a majority in the future. And if a child that is born in the United States by illegal parents, he is a citizen of the United States. Along with that, I don't know how you're going to recognize the difference between an illegal and a legal immigrant exactly, considering that the majority of immigrants that come to the United States happen to be Hispanic, and that's where most of the illegal immigrants happen to come from. How are you going to recognize the difference here?
if you look at the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, these people in Europe who are fleeing wars, people will now say, oh, what happened to, Statue of Liberty? Give us, you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor. Yeah, at that point in time, there was no promise to feed the hungry, no promise to pay the poor from the taxpayer. That's a very different time. It was a very different reason for people migrating to this country, and it is not a scenario today that is tenable when you have people coming in and suckling at the public teat.
I mean, the reason that they came to the United States is to have a prosperous life, so they can get a job that will give them a better wage compared to the job that they had in their motherland. That's why they happen to come here. It's still happening today. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 17.4% of labor force is made up of foreign-born workers. So yes, back then and right now, people were coming to America so they could have a prosperous life.
Well, yeah, and they looked at it as the land of opportunity.
Yes.
The way that they could go and work hard and make something for themselves, not a place to come and just get taken care of.
Yes.
That was the thing. It's a little bit different mentality.
No, it's not. This still happens even amongst undocumented immigrants. Like, this is one of the biggest myths of undocumented immigrants. Like, they take more than they contribute to the U.S. economy. However, according to the new American Economy Research Funds, Mexican undocumented immigrant household earns $92 billion in household income and contributes $9.8 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. Yes, like even undocumented immigrants immigrants pay taxes. What a surprise. But keep in mind, this is just for Mexican undocumented immigrants, who make up the majority of undocumented immigrants, by the way. So yes, they are definitely productive and they are definitely hardworking.
Well, what happened is they were fleeing impending war, right? Throughout, obviously, I don't know if you're a history buff.
Weren't the Irish going through a potato famine and they were treated badly by the British Empire? I don't think they were fleeing a war per se, but in the 1890s, they were definitely going through something called the famine years.
So a lot of people were fleeing Europe, right? Because of these impending wars. They were constantly under the threat of tyranny. They wanted to be a part of America. They weren't coming here to get handouts. They were not coming here to this country to break the law. Not saying that everyone right now who's coming to this country is breaking the law, but a disproportionate amount of crime certainly committed on the southern border is by people who are here illegally. So they came here with no promises on boats.
So let me clarify what Steven was saying here. Steven said back then immigrants weren't looking for handouts. They still don't. I mean, especially if you're an undocumented immigrant. According to a data by the Annual Social Economic Supplements, in a 2017 study, immigrants have taken less in government assistance than native-born citizens. Also, and this is pretty logically known and studied, undocumented immigrants are not eligible for a lot of government benefits. The only way they can is if their child is a US citizen. Also, it should be noted that undocumented immigrants and immigrants in general commit less crime than native-born citizens. Unless you're saying undocumented immigrants are criminals simply because of the fact that they are here illegally. Which, if you're doing that, you have created an appeal to ignorance fallacy. But anyway, a study done by the University of Wisconsin-Madison shows that through the years of 2012 and 2018, they've committed less crimes than US citizens.
Few bucks in their pocket. Today, half of all immigrant households receive at least one major welfare program.
Wow.
Once again, most natural-born citizens of the United States, according to the source that I've shown, are likely to have more than one assistant government programs. Also, in this data, it turns out that only 55% of those 49% of welfare owners at least use those welfare programs at least once. Also, he forgets to mention that welfare earners were somewhat dropped in 45% of the immigration household and 51% of the non-citizen households. And he also doesn't seem to talk about the fact of what type of welfare that they've been receiving. And it turns out that many of them get welfare programs such as Medicaid and also some form of food stamp programs. Personally, I don't see how this is a problem, considering that native-born citizens are going to have a lot more money compared to immigrants and non-citizens if you have a family of 4. If you are working and you are earning minimum wage and you're working for 40 hours a work week, you should be eligible for welfare, because unless the government decides to raise the minimum wage, welfare programs like these are going to exist. And one other thing he forgets to mention in this source is that the weight of each of the welfare programs, and it turns out that native-born citizens tend to have a higher weight compared to all the other immigrants combined. Because if you add up all the other immigrants in the 2018 survey, they add up to approximately 65 million. Also, another thing Steven is forgetting to mention, that welfare programs were created in 1935. So I'm pretty sure a lot of immigrants would have taken those welfare programs if they had the opportunity to, back in the 1860s and 1910s. But let's look at the statistic again. This author decided to add multiple different statistics of immigrants, such as neutral citizens, legal residents, and illegal immigrants. So again, Steven doesn't seem to mention that, despite the fact that he included that in his videos. Also, going back to the chart, the sample size of the native-borns compared to the sample size of the immigrants seem to have been a pretty small sample size, whereas the immigrants were around 15,000, and the sample size of the native-born were 22,000. So I think the author is being a bit deceptive here.
The left wants mass illegal immigration. Why? So they can guarantee a path to citizenship and they can get votes. Race has nothing to do with it.
The fact that you're actually mentioning that immigrants in the modern days are leeches, I think it definitely does have something to do with it.
But here's the thing. At one point, race did have something to do with immigration policy. And I was going by rote this morning or last night when I was talking about this. I think a lot of you don't know that there was a proactive shift in immigration policy. You can thank Ted Kennedy here in this country because they wanted to favor big corporations and keep a permanent working class.
Well, this is not even true, considering the fact back then big corporations did benefit off of unskilled labor as well. Despite jobs back in the days being easy to get, they also were in dangerous places. Also, don't quote me on this, I'm pretty sure nowadays more companies are looking for high-skilled workers rather than low-skilled workers. Because if you have a college degree, you can get a lot more jobs compared to if you don't have a college degree.
Okay. So let me kind of give you a little bit of a briefer. So after World War II, there were a lot of immigrants, right? They were coming from Europe, and they were skilled. They were looking for good jobs. In other words, they weren't coming from countries that had not developed places. What do you mean? Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, places that have not given anything else, and I mean this, anything else to the modern industrialized world. They were coming from places like Germany, like Poland, like parts of the UK.
Well, modern industrial would be somewhat of a deceptive term, considering that many of the immigrants that were coming in were refugees whose homes were destroyed during World War II. Also, going back to history.com, the United States passed their first refugee and settlement law to deal with the influx of Europeans seeking permanent residence in the United States after World War II. Also, in 1952, the McCarran-Walter Act formally ends the exclusion of Asian immigrants to the United States. And sure, I can probably agree that many of these European immigrants may have been skilled, but most of them were not.
And relatively similar cultures, too.
Right. Relatively similar cultures.
But relatively
Now, of course, they were going to say the relatively similar culture. That's a cop-out answer to them saying race. Because let's be clear here, there's no such thing as a white culture. Europeans had many different culture in their country.
similar.
And they were looking for good jobs. Now, here's the thing. A lot of CEOs didn't like that because you're talking about bringing immigrants coming in who are skilled, and so they'll want to be paid more.
Yeah.
Again, I know I'm repeating myself, this is not even true, because many of the immigrants that were coming in after World War II were refugees.
Right? So there was a bill, Ted Kennedy supported this bill that cut off immigration from what we now know as the EU, opened it up wide to the Pacific Rim countries. Okay? It's called the Hart-Celler Immigration Act of 1965. And they claim that it expands civil rights, as far as the movement to immigration and abolishing this national origins quota system. Really what it did is it actually made it nearly impossible for European immigrants to come here with more skills.
The Hart-Celler Act actually eliminated the national origin quota system, which had set limits on the number of individuals from a given nation who could immigrate to the country. So, no, European immigrants can still come to this country according to the bill, and it didn't exclude any of them, by the way. All it did was allow non-whites to come to the United States as well. So, again, what we're seeing here is that Steven is definitely being racist. And if it's not obvious now, I don't know when it's going to be obvious.
Yeah.
With more education, because they believed, and you go, why favor people from the Pacific Rim? Because you're talking about people who would come from manufacturing jobs where they were making pennies, go to the United States, and guess what? They were less likely to ask for more. And so this was the government saying, hey, CEOs, they want cheap labor. And right now, that's not necessarily, the Irish are coming in and opening up pubs. The Italians are coming in and, they're opening up restaurants and also organized crime. But I digress.
They actually had to make money first in order to open up those restaurants and pubs. Also, if it's just a matter of owning businesses, there's plenty of Mexican restaurants out there. There's also plenty of Indian restaurants out there. Like, there are a lot of different businesses that immigrants have brought to this country. Also, unskilled foreign workers can make a business in this country as well.
They said, hey, the Germans are coming in and they're becoming engineers. These CEOs don't want that. So let's change our immigration policy to make sure that we bring in as unskilled, dependent, and therefore grateful to the government immigrants that we can.
But once again, a lot of Germans that came to America came in even before World War II. But as for the Germans that did come to the United States after World War II, were also mostly unskilled workers. Also, fun fact, America did also turn down a lot of Jewish refugees that were escaping from Nazi Germany. In summer of 1942, the SS Dortmund set sail carrying hundreds of desperate Jewish refugees en route to New York City from Sweden. And the reason that they were kicked out is because they were feared to be Nazi spies. And let's be clear here, there are Jews that had success opening up businesses in America. So think about this, okay? Steven is claiming that the demographic of politics will change if more and more immigrants are allowed to come into the United States. And Steven, in this video, is definitely claiming that immigrants right now are leeches to the American economy, or that the ones that do come in are unskilled workers. Like, does he see why the Republican Party is not supported by the immigrants of the United States?
That was a decision that was made. You need to understand when you go, yeah, hold on. A lot of you inherently think there's a difference. You go, well, if I look at the Irish and the Italians, sure, we were a country of immigrants, but it feels like there was something different.
No, there wasn't. Many of the Irish that came to the United States at the time were actually oppressed. Not only that, most of them were working unskilled laborious jobs. And even a fair amount of them were committing crimes in the country, because again, they were oppressed, and along with the fact that they didn't make enough money. Along with that, back in the 1900s, many cities were considering that the Irish were the dangerous class in the United States, meaning that no one was going to hire them. In fact, they were so anti-Irish that they fired an Irish cop because they thought that they would bring a dangerous presence because Irish were committing the most crimes in Boston. Even the Italians had to go through the same deal and ask for crime. Even Steven mentioned something about the Italian mafia in his video. Al Capone ring a bell? Anyone? Yeah, so like the only difference between the immigrants of back then and the immigrants of right now is their skin color.
Yep.
So what you're saying is like, okay, let's say America is a Buick.
Yes.
And Ted Kennedy, for example, would be a CEO.
Yes.
Okay, let's say it's driven into the water.
Yes.
Now the water is immigration, and it's filling the car.
And
now Americans are Mary Joe.
Okay, that was probably the worst analogy ever. And as I've said, Steven is definitely showing that he is a racist. With every evidence that I have shown in this video, modern immigrants are not leeches to the American system. In fact, they have contributed to the economy a lot. I'm going to skip some parts of his video because he's going to reference something that probably has nothing to do with the argument, and all he talks about is what Ted Kennedy did a long time ago.
So, Jill, but you were going to talk, this is also, now this comes to today, and all the references are available at loudwithcreditor.com.
Right.
There was a proactive approach in the bill, in America's legislative policy to basically say, we don't want to bring in people who are coming from universities, coming from skills. We want to bring in people from sweatshops because that's what's best for the CEOs.
That's not even true. These days, you are offered more job for having a bachelor's degree. CEOs actually benefit more with high-skilled workers because with technology taking over, and believe me, it will happen, a lot of laborious jobs are going to be replaced. Also, did you notice that sweatshop reference? Steven is now getting into the whole Chinese stereotype. You may as well just say it, Steven. You don't like non-white foreigners.
Yeah, and so, this bolsters their voting base.
Let's see, Steven, you are the biggest conservative YouTuber in the platform. You've already called American immigrants leeches, and that their culture is not the same as yours, and that they bring a lot of crime to the country. So once again, why do you think they would take your side? With the evidence that I have shown you in this video, these were the same stereotypes given to the Irish and the Italians. Sure, they were white, but even they had to face a lot of discrimination when they came to America.
People coming in from the southern border, and so they're like, okay, well, how many? Nearly 1.5 million encounters thus far in fiscal 2022. I think it starts in October, so it's about halfway through the year, just a little bit over.
Yep.
And compare that to 646,000 encounters for all of fiscal 2020. An
Make
entire
sure I
year.
confirm
That
this.
was
1.5
yeah, and that's
to 800.
No, just it's six
to
right above it.
646.
646,000. That's encounters.
That's like almost.
Has this chart actually proven that those 1 million people are actually illegal immigrants? And let's be clear here, most of these people actually have jobs and they pay their fair share of taxes. And do you know why they have these jobs? Because many of the immigrants, along with the native population, are not going to do it.
Then the Trump administration encountered at
And by the way, how many of them are getting formula? We don't have those numbers, but a lot.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Jesus, Steven, you are pro-life, but once the baby is born, it is the mother's responsibility to take care of the baby even if they can't afford it. The Access to Baby Formula Act, or otherwise known as the Formula Act, is to help ensure moms and babies who rely on special supplements, nutrition, and program for women, infant, and children can have the formula that they need if they have low income. To be clear, there were a fair amount of Republicans, not surprisingly, that actually oppose this bill. And as I've said, these type of problems are going to keep existing if big corporations don't pay their workers a fair wage. Then again, Steven in his own words says that he doesn't actually have the numbers for it, but he's just got a bad feeling that it's a lot.
Part of it, but
Shut your mouth. You think this is your country? What are you, a racist? But wait a second. I just want to buy formula. You're giving it to people who aren't even citizens. Shut your racist mouth.
Yeah.
Well, we're also giving it to legal immigrants and citizens, along with non-citizens. Like basically anyone that has a low income and they have a baby.
Well, the Supreme Court actually just heard a case where they basically wanted to get rid of the stay in Mexico policy, where Donald Trump said, look, if you're coming to this country illegally, the door is revolving. It goes right back into Mexico and you can stay there. You can make your asylum claim there. You can get everything sorted out.
Well, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Article 14, which states that everyone has the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution in other countries. So, really, this is why people were upset, because Trump was opposing human rights. I don't seem to understand how anyone or you may think it's okay, but you can't deny that this is what happened for those seeking asylum. Unless you're literally advocating to go against human rights.
No voter ID,
because
that's racist, even though 87% of black Americans want some kind of ID. But
so let me see if I quoted Steven right. First off, let me be clear, many in the left don't actually say it's racist, but it is suppression. So you're telling me that 87% of black people in this nation want an ID. You could have just said 87% of black people have a confirmed ID, because now you just put yourself in a position of why do 87% of black Americans want a voter ID.
At that point, black Americans are inconvenient, so shut your racist mouth. Hey, black Americans, you think you should have voter ID? What are you, racist? Well, I need ID.
How much you want to bet that he really wanted to say massa after that word?
Yeah, but guess what? They're actually hedging their bets because they think voter ID is racist and they say you shouldn't have to have it to vote in this country, but they're also saying that everyone should get an ID just in case.
Who in the left was actually saying that? Like, even if they said it was racist, nobody would actually be saying something like that.
Look, it's about voting demographics, just to be clear.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with race, people, even though I slandered a bunch of immigrants of being leeches, lazy, and unskilled. And despite my political party demonizing immigrants in the modern days, this has nothing to do with racism. It's all about voting demographic.
I don't believe that people use interchangeably that race is destiny. Now, I also, by the way, this is something people won't like to hear. I also don't think there's anything wrong with white Americans wanting their neighborhood to look similar to how it looked with their dad and their grandparents. And, you know, people tend to be comfortable around people they were raised with.
So you don't think it's a problem if a white person has a problem with a bunch of Hispanic people coming into a white neighborhood? Because they won't be comfortable because it's not the type of people that they're raised by. Despite this being a form of discrimination, if any white person or anyone for that matter does something like that, but you're apparently okay with that.
Have you been to Mexican neighborhoods? Been to largely black neighborhoods? This is a natural process that takes place.
So now you're just assuming that if a bunch of black people or a bunch of Hispanic people moved into a predominantly white neighborhood, they're going to mess up that neighborhood. So yes, Steven is definitely trying to backfire on the fact that this is about race, and that if white people become a minority, that's a problem for him. Look, I admit that the white population is going to become a minority in America. But you want to know something? I personally don't have a problem with that. The only way you can have a problem with that is if you're racist. By the way, I was born and raised in a black neighborhood, and I'm brown. And I admit that they actually don't look that good compared to white neighborhoods, but at the same time, we have to look at why that is the reason, instead of just pointing fingers and say that they're just not responsible enough compared to white people.
Doesn't mean that you should seclude yourself, but I don't blame black people for watching black entertainment television. I don't blame Latino people for watching Telemundo. I understand that we have different tastes because we have different cultures.
So Steven is saying that because of the culture of the blacks and Hispanics, their neighborhood is the way it is. I'm surprised that nobody has caught on to the fact that Steven is being a racist. But either way, even if blacks and Hispanics become the majority, this country is not going to be in ruins.
Melanin doesn't determine how you vote. Unfortunately, it's about buying votes from the Democratic Party. Like you said, they realized they weren't going to be able to buy the votes of, for example, Italian Americans who came here and started businesses and were paying taxes.
Then why was it the case that many immigrants in the 30s were voting for Democrats? And fun fact, FDR actually won in a landslide in the Electoral College. Also, how would the Italians be paying taxes if they didn't have enough money when they came to America in the early 1900s? Like, yes, they had to do a lot of labor-intensive jobs back then as well, and it wasn't really hard to find a job there. And Steven also says in this video that the Italians didn't have enough money to rub together. Then how would they have opened up the restaurants that Steven kept claiming that they had?
You remember who helped you, right? You remember who brought you in? You remember who, even during a pandemic, we paused is it Title 42? We paused Title 40, right? Remember we gave you formula? Remember how to vote.
Yeah, because it's not like the Republicans demonize immigrants constantly, saying that they're going to take your jobs, saying that they're going to invade this country. And even though I said that, have you been to a black neighborhood? Have you been to a Hispanic neighborhood? They look pretty bad compared to white neighborhoods. But still, I'm not racist, I just know that they look pretty bad. And that modern day immigrants need welfare to be able to live and support their family. Therefore, I'm going to assume that the Democrats are trying to plot against the Republicans.
Because on the issues, they can't. When you look at the issues of abortion, you look at the issues of even taxes, you look at the issues of what's taking place in schools, brown Americans, meaning all Latino Americans, and even Muslim Americans, I'm including them among brown Americans and black Americans, overwhelmingly would align with a center-right point of view.
Even though they may not align with the values of many leftists, they're still not going to support a party that constantly demonizes them. Not only that, many of the immigrants that do happen to come in actually don't have enough money to be able to feed their family despite having a job. And they have to depend on welfare, sadly. Republicans tend to be the group that wants to get rid of that sort of system. So why should they vote for the Republican Party?
So they try to make it about things that they give you, so they can purchase your vote. And then as we see today, they only use you when it's convenient.
Yes, of course. As an immigrant, I should vote for people that constantly demonize me. I should let them have power as opposed to the people that are more pro-immigrant. Because I should vote against my interest. Because I should be voting for people that think that it's okay to discriminate against me. Think that it's okay for others to feel uncomfortable around me. Once again, your party was the party that voted against Muslim immigration and violated human rights if someone wanted to seek asylum in a certain country. Steven himself said that immigrants these days are leeches because they take welfare, they don't contribute like others. Immigrants back then were skilled and the immigrants right now are not as skilled. And have you looked at the neighborhoods of these Hispanics and blacks? If they become a majority, they're going to ruin the country. So obviously they're going to go for the Democrats and not vote for anything that you stand for.
To the actual white supremacists, and there are very few, like to the four of you. Look,
The boots?
yeah, there are 50% of white people, actually probably more in our country, who share your same culture, and they vote Democrat.
Then give everyone a reason to why immigrants shouldn't vote Democrat, but they should vote Republican. Even though 50% of white people do vote Democrat, this doesn't diminish the point. The Democrats do tend to have a more favorable outlook on immigrants as opposed to the Republicans. By the way, I highly doubt that 50% of white people in this country have been voting Democrats because for the past two elections, Republicans have had more white votes than Democrats did.
And by the way, right now, think about it, and I understand demographics will change, and so you're concerned about that. However, let's assume those demographics change. The demographics are already bad enough when you take people from your own race and from your own culture. You can't say that it was black people. You can't say that it was brown people who screwed you with Barack Obama. It was white people with Bill Clinton, with Jimmy Carter. So I just want to make sure people are going to come and say, oh, it's a cop-out. I'm not saying that there aren't differences inherently between races. I'm not saying that there aren't differences culturally that often have to do with how people are that are racially based. I'm not saying any of that, but what I am saying is the primary issue is not that, and that's not how the Democrats are thinking of it. They're thinking of whose votes can we buy.
Yeah, it's almost like the Democrats have a more favorable view of immigrants, whereas for the Republicans, they don't. Like, yeah, they're definitely buying votes here, aren't they? I mean, it's not because my value system believes that people have the right to discriminate against others or support people that feel uncomfortable with other people that aren't the same skin color as them. Let's be clear here, Steven has so far not been able to convince anyone to why immigrants should vote for Republicans. So far, he's stereotyped black and Hispanic cultures based on their neighborhoods. Like, he does realize that blacks and Hispanics don't actually choose to be in the neighborhood that they're at. I'm pretty sure if they had the money to buy a house at a good suburban area, they would do it. This isn't about voting demographics. It's pretty evident that this is about race.
And why don't you talk about half of this country whose votes have been bought? I would take 10 brown people who look and act differently from me for every white person who shares my race and culture and is voting to take my rights away.
What form of rights are they taking away from you, Steven? I mean, so far, it looks like you got everything you need, but then again, we all know you want to say the N-word with the hard R at the end.
I'd rather have 10 Latino American, assuming, by the way, let's be clear, all legal immigrants, versus one Swedish immigrant who comes in and wants a social safety net system, and by the way, now has lost his bragging rights of being neutral as his shitty country tries to join NATO. How about this? Once you pay up the back bill, pay your tab and you can get in.
Yeah, Steven, I'm sorry that people criticize the fact that you hate Mexicans, because it's not like the current immigrants that are here are working for it. In fact, they've actually worked a lot harder than you did to become an American. You were just lucky to be born here.
The problem is that we have right now a system of immigration laws and it starts these people, and by these people, right now, I mean, yeah, primarily brown people. I mean, yeah, primarily people coming from South America by design, just because geographically it's easiest for them to come in illegally, and it's in the Democratic Party's best interest for the immigrants to be illegal. Think about that for a second.
But think about this for a second. How do illegal immigrants even get to vote considering they're not even citizens yet? Like, in what ways are the Democrats influencing votes by bringing in illegals considering that they can't even vote? And this wasn't created by design. It was because the Democrats created better policies for the immigrants as opposed to the Republicans. Once again, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but that's the truth.
That by itself, it's in the best interest of the Republican Party and of the American people for immigrants to be coming here legally.
Just because they're legal immigrants doesn't mean that they're going to be on the side of the Republicans either, because just like the illegal immigrants, they get demonized a lot by the Republicans as well. Like, I'm sorry, Steven, God put you around people that are not the same skin color as you. In this video, he also attacked the Hart-Celler Act of 1965, a bill that made it legal for different nationality immigrants to come to America. So really, this isn't about illegal or legal immigration.
It is absolutely, unequivocally, in the best interest of the Democratic Party for them to enter illegally. That's why their policy reflects it.
I don't understand this mentality of him saying illegal immigrants can vote because, again, they can't. But then again, I kind of do, because you don't really hate illegal immigrants specifically. You, in fact, hate all immigrants unless they're white. Not only that, you also want them to think the same as you, vote for the same things as you. Because Steven is a xenophobe, he just won't admit it, because he has the mentality of, if I say I'm a xenophobe, then I am a xenophobe. The The immigrants that are here, illegal or legal immigrants, have worked much harder than people like Steven or anyone that's a natural born United States citizen. Because for them to get here, they really had to struggle. And for the natural born citizens, they were lucky to be born in this country. Steven and his ilk may hate the fact that immigrants are in this country. I take pride in it because I consider that to be American pride. The fact that it can accept different people from different backgrounds, nationalities, race, and culture is just great because it shows me that our country is a beacon of prosperity for the immigrants that want to come here. You can love your country all you want, but the moment you feel like that it only belongs to people like you is the moment when you have failed your country. We've fought against many oppressive forces in our country. Let's find ways to get along with each other rather than find ways to separate each other based on race or religion or culture. America, after all, is a melting pot. Thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you later.